This week on To the Contrary.
First, is the so-called war on women over? Next, what yes means yes means for interpersonal relationships on campus. Behind the headlines, Representative and Democratic National Committee Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz on her battle with breast cancer and how she's helping other women.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, women voters. Have Republicans diffused the so-called war on women? Democrats running for Congress are backing away from that rhetoric as the GOP has now pushed back aggressively against claims that Republicans are anti-women. Closing the gender gap is essential for the Republicans in next month's elections. Female Republican candidates have attacked the notion of the war on women with indignation and disbelief.
Congressman Gary Peters and his buddies want you to believe I'm waging a war on women. Really?
Meanwhile, male GOP candidates are taking a different approach. In their ads, many talk directly into the camera. This is a shift from when they were accompanied by wives or other women when discussing women's issues. Commentators say these candidates are trying to prove they get it.
So, Congresswoman Norton, have Republicans diffused the so-called war on women?
Not hardly, Bonnie. There are a lot of Republicans running who still believe that a woman should have ultrasound before she gets an abortion and who are disguising their views on contraception.
I'm not sure Republicans have diffused it, but I do think the American people are ready for a new conversation, one that's about the economy and foreign affairs.
The polls clearly demonstrate that the gender gap is alive and well, and that ain't going to change until the Republicans stop trying to close clinics and find a new hobby.
I, too, have always thought this war on women thing is silly. When Republicans say it, when Democrats say it, the whole thing's pretty silly to me.
Silly to you, but how come then, your response to this side's claims that they're still trying to close clinics, and it's pretty obvious Republicans haven't given up on trying to beat back women's rights on reproductive health?
Well, I think it's one thing to argue that Republicans have policies that don't benefit women, and I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm saying it's one thing to argue that, and it's another thing to say that Republicans, including women like Terry Lynn Land, have a war on women. And I actually think, to go beyond silly, I actually find the terminology really offensive, particularly in this day and age when we're actually at war with a terrorist group, to be conflating that with war.
Well, remember, Republicans in the last election were not really running on women. They just said what they really meant. And when that came out of their mouths, they made the war on women. Nobody started, they started this fight.
Well, let's just back up a little bit. First of all, we're talking about a few outliers. And I think that is there a grain of truth in the war on women? Well, when you have people like Todd Akin out there, it reinforces this idea that conservatives are in a different generation, in a backwards world. But the reality is that most women want to talk about healthcare and technology and all of the things that we usually talk about on this show, and that they recognize that life in America is pretty good for girls and for women, and they get tired of hearing how hostile society is when they know it's not. So I think people are ready to say, let's talk about the issues that affect us every day, about bringing down my grocery bill and my gas bill and helping me choose what school I send my children to and making sure I have ownership and control over my health care dollars. Those are the things that women care about. And I don't know if Republicans have gotten there yet, but that's how they're going to get the women vote back.
So this is not about rhetoric. This is about policy. And this is about the fact that Republicans consistently, on both the federal level and at the state levels, are acting aggressively at every turn to restrict access to abortion, to restrict access to contraception, to slow down passage of the Violence
But would
Against
you
Women
agree that maybe because there haven't been any outbursts recently, this issue isn't as big an issue as it was 2 years ago?
Yeah, I strongly disagree with that, actually. If you look at, for example, in Colorado right now, both the governor race as well as the Senate race is largely being focused on the issue of abortion, not just contraception, but abortion. You have the candidate for governor going out and saying that he believes that an IUD is an abortifacient, which is simply not true, and that he thinks, that therefore shouldn't be covered. You also have the Senate debate between the two candidates was largely focused on abortion. Again, this is something that voters do care about because these views are so extreme. And until the Republicans find a new hobby, focus on the economy instead of what's happening inside women's bodies, this ain't going to end.
But I wonder about, right now everybody's saying the election is all about the ground game and getting out the vote. And voter turnout is expected to be low, which would mean more Republican stalwarts going to the polls than Democrats who are kind of, fatigued over the whole political wrangling that goes on. So is that why, would you say that's why this seems, at least on the surface, to have fizzled out as an issue this time?
Well, again, I don't think it seemed to have fizzled out at all. I mean, this is still in the newspapers every single day, these issues. But I do think that we need to look at the broader agenda of the Republican Party and these candidates. And it's also sad and pathetic. Recently I reported for RH Reality Check on a new effort of Main Street Partnership, a Republican group that had this effort, Women to Women. They wanted to do speaking tours in a lot of these areas where the gender gap is really pronounced, like North Carolina and that Senate race. And the founder of the group actually said that, first and foremost, she was asked about what issues they were going to talk to women about, and she said suntan lotion. I mean, my goodness, they're just flailing around, and they don't know really how to talk to women.
Well, voters. I don't know about that. I'm going to North Carolina on Monday to speak to women, and I'm not talking about suntan lotion. What I will talk about is that our side has to take gender differences seriously in a way that the left does, and our side simply does not yet. But I think that they are slowly coming around to it, and I think groups like IWF that puts out a positive agenda about women and what women are interested in is another step forward. But I think that we have to be careful. I mean, the reality is when it comes to contraception, it's Republicans who have said, let's stop having a debate about this over in terms of health care, sell it over the counter.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean about disguising your view on, because they don't want it in the Affordable Health Care Act, and so they think they're diffusing it by saying those of you who need a doctor's prescription, and many, many women do not need something for a one-night stand over the counter. They need a prescription, particularly when you see what is coming out now on the differences between health care. Now, if you're for selling it over the counter, why are you against a doctor being able to prescribe it? Just tell me that.
It's just about who's paying for it. It's about if you are a woman who needs contraception, then fine, absolutely. And the majority of Americans use and support contraception. So let's allow people to decide if that's the kind of health plan they need. But if you're an older woman or you're somebody who doesn't need this right now, then we should allow people to have that kind of ownership and control over their health care dollars.
Well, this is a very interesting
But wait a second. Then why aren't you fighting at the same time to get Viagra not covered by health plans?
Well, I would think that it shouldn't be.
No woman women don't need Viagra.
No, I think people, the more that you can create a health care plan that fits your needs and the family's needs is the better. But
option. If we're talking gender equality, all these health care plans that don't want to cover reproductive health do cover Viagra. One way to, and Viagra is the #1 selling drug in the country, I believe, or #2.
I have no problem.
So why
with
not taking
that.
it? Why not? And talk about something that isn't medically necessary.
No.
Why not get that uncovered by plans?
I'm fine with that. I mean, I really do think that we should make insurance what it was supposed to be, insurance, and allowing people to own their health care dollars and have more of that take-home pay so they can make those choices.
But you can't choose that. I mean, they weren't covering contraception. So a woman, when you had your plan, it wasn't covered, and you were paying for it, actually, because you pay for health insurance, and then your health care is not getting covered. And so I just think that's a bit absurd to say that, a woman should be able to pick her own plan that covers it. She couldn't.
All right, now we need to move on. Let us know what you think about this. Please follow me on Twitter @BonnieUrbay and @ToTheContrary. From the so-called war on women to sexual assault. How is the yes means yes trend designed to stop campus sexual assault playing out in individual relationships across the country? Colleges and universities are under pressure from the Obama administration to end campus rape. In New York, Governor Cuomo enacted a state guideline officially endorsing that only, quote, yes means yes. This comes after California's Governor Jerry Brown signed an affirmative consent law requiring college students to obtain, quote, affirmative, conscious, and voluntary agreement, end quote, throughout sexual activity. Confirming consent is an ongoing issue as students sort through the new rules governing sexual contact. Critics question whether this is a realistic approach to preventing rape in the future. So will this yes means yes initiative work?
I don't think it will, and it's not because I don't take the issue of rape extremely seriously. I think everybody at this table does. It's a criminal act, and we need to treat it that way. I think the problem is that people, and not just on the right, even the LA Times have said that it's very difficult to let the government start to micromanage our relationships in the bedroom.
Yeah, and it's easy to make fun of this, at every step of the way as if it were a process, and that's not what it's meant to say. What it is meant to say is that more and more we're asking campuses, I'm going to be sponsoring a bill, I'll be introducing it as the original co-sponsor, that you not only not only the university, but that these matters be referred to law enforcement. That is exactly what law enforcement will look at. At every step of the way, the U.S. attorney will say, was there consent? No one means that, of course, and it puts everybody on alert. You really must go, you must understand that this is a process where the woman can say no at any point, so why not have her, in her own way, by the way, say yes at every point?
Well, how do you do that? I mean, really, think about it.
Are you sure? Are you still sure? Just making sure you're sure, okay?
Well, there's even an app.
You do it by the way you respond sexually.
An app
you do it
that you put on your cell phone and you record saying yes at every point. And then it's posted in the cloud where, by the way, all that stuff was just hacked about those nude pictures.
Let me tell you, I have
Lawrence.
several problems with this app, and that being the first one is I would definitely, and I would encourage most other young women, not to put your cell phone number in, who your sexual partners are, how drunk you are.
If you're half clothed by the time you're saying yes, that we're fine at this point, you want that picture on the internet?
The second biggest problem with this app that I feel like people are not talking about is what's to stop a young man from having a blackout drunk girl and putting in the information himself, going to her phone, getting the code out, and then putting it in his phone, and then but seriously though.
But he wouldn't have the video of her saying yes at each point.
Well,
which is the biggest part of the app.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to. It's very nuanced. But the point being that someone could essentially just put in all that information and then say, "Well, there you go," when the cops ask them.
Totally creepy, right? I mean, that app is creepy, but it's also serious because it's part of a broader frame in which we expect women to hold responsibility for not getting raped. And it puts the emphasis on women as victims saying, oh, wait, I wanted this.
I actually think that's
I'm just asking, I mean, I think back to my college days, and I think about and I had one boyfriend through college, but I mean, I think about in the early encounters can I kiss you? Can I do this to you? Can I do that to you?
Bonnie.
Yes.
Bonnie,
men and women, I'm not saying we don't need to do way more to prevent sexual assault. That's a hugely important issue. I'm wondering, how the heck is this going to play out in interpersonal relationships that are confused already?
And I think the emphasis is in the right place. You have 1 in 5, according to Department of Justice statistics, women are, sexually assaulted in college or attempt. And so we have to try something. But the fact is, it's interesting that people are like, how could this work? At the same time, everyone's saying about the same population, millennials, that they're overexpressing themselves all the time, right? That they're constantly talking about themselves. And so, I don't think it's that hard to give consent. And people grow and people change. And honestly, people are driven to have sex, so they'll figure out how to do it.
I must say this, that's more than verbal consent to proceed further in the sexual act. Do I need to tell anybody on this table?
Well, but that's what of course there's more than verbal consent, but these yes means yes laws and rules
do not mean
say you have
yes. No, it doesn't.
It says you have to verbalize it.
No, that does not. That is not how a U.S. attorney would take that. And that's why enforcement here. And let me not hesitate to say that the way in which these laws are structured makes them almost unenforceable.
Right.
Because it would be very hard to go through these steps.
You couldn't prove that.
Yeah.
And one of the bigger concerns I have with this law is that it sort of perpetuates this idea that men are always the perpetrators and women are always the victims. And I don't think that we want to send that message. Sometimes two people do things that maybe they regret later. Sometimes one person is really bad, but we want to make sure that we're not sort of forcing women and men into stereotypes that I don't think any of us want.
And actually, by the way, tune in next week because we have a story about women who rape men. It is physiologically possible, and the numbers are much greater than anybody ever would have conceived. But back to yes means yes. If it's not, you're saying then that it won't be followed in a way where the woman says yes, yes, yes to each. Okay, then why?
And I can understand why everybody is taking it literally. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason is to send the message out.
Symbolic, I think.
Really. To send the message out that each part of each component part of the sexual act must have consent. I think that's about all it says.
And it's just spreading awareness, I think, is the big thing there. But that also saying, as far as college kids and the birds and the bees and everything go, I would personally say that I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with introducing more steps into getting consent, or whether this is a good idea to have sex before someone does it, because maybe this will actually stop people from just jumping into something too fast, and they'll take a step back and say, is this a good idea? And in having that conversation, maybe they'll decide to not do something both people will regret at another time.
And it's good for women who are drunk.
Yes.
They didn't consent at any stage of that process.
Yes.
Well, it means you can't, if you are drunk, you cannot consent even if you consent.
As it should be.
All right. Behind the headlines, Florida Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, her victorious battle with cancer, and how a new initiative, quote, Free the Data, will help future breast cancer patients.
I was a breast cancer advocate for years. I passed legislation as a state legislator to protect women who'd just been through mastectomies. And when I found my own lump and was diagnosed with breast cancer, and then subsequently was diagnosed as a BRCA2 carrier, I didn't know, even with all my advocacy, that as an Ashkenazi Jewish woman, I was 5 times more likely to carry the breast cancer gene than most women in the population. And if I didn't know, then I knew we had a lot of educating to do.
Hasn't advocacy gotten better even since then?
We've certainly made people aware that there is a risk that 1 in 8 and that 1 in 8 women in America will get breast cancer in their lifetime.
African Americans and Ashkenazi Jews are more likely to carry the BRCA1 gene mutation, increasing their risk of breast and ovarian cancer.
Your risk of getting breast cancer again is extremely high, between 40 and 85%. And my risk of getting ovarian cancer was between 40 and 85% by the time I was 50. So they urged me to have a double mastectomy. I could have watched and waited, and I would have had to have an MRI every 6 months, but then you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I ended up having 7 surgeries over the course of a year, including at 41 years old having my ovaries removed.
Tell me what that experience is like.
It is life-altering. I mean, it stops you in your tracks. I told my children, and then I knew that I would use my own experience and my profile to help fill a niche and fill a void, and use my experience to raise awareness so that we make it more likely that other young women can catch their cancer early and increase their chances of survival.
Now, how do you talk to your kids about cancer?
My daughter said, "Are you going to be okay?" And I said, "Yes, I'm going to be okay." And she said, "But Mommy, does that mean I'm going to get breast cancer?" I mean, in the same conversation. And, your blood just runs cold, because I couldn't tell her, no, you're not.
How young are you going to get your daughters tested?
When they would have the tests is really going to depend on where they are at their life. Is marriage imminent? And, what are they thinking about in terms of childbearing? And but it really complicates things, and you just want to, as a mother, I want to keep that burden from them for as long as possible, but I know that eventually they're going to have to know, and it's really hard. It really is. And then to know that you potentially are passing that on, and they had no control over it. It's just, I can't tell you what that does. It just tears me up.
Wasserman Schultz's personal battle with cancer motivated her to write the Early Act.
It created a national education and awareness campaign targeted at younger women between 15 and 45 years old, because we know that very often younger women think they're invincible. They're not focused on their breast health. They don't know what's normal for them. And so we wanted to make sure that they still get regular clinical exams, that doctors, because so often doctors, when a young woman comes in with a problem with her breast, they are dismissive of young women and send them home and say, you know what, it's probably just a cyst, come back in 6 months. And they come back in 6 months, and it turns out it's breast cancer, and it's often in a younger woman diagnosed at a later stage, meaning their treatment is more comprehensive, and they're less likely to survive.
What is Free the Data?
The Free the Data movement encourages women at risk, particularly women who've been diagnosed as BRCA positive, to upload their data to the Free the Data database, and also to push publicly to get Myriad, which is the only company prior to a U.S. Supreme Court decision last year that had the rights to administer the BRCA1 and BRCA2 test, the data that they've been collecting for decades, to free their data and put it into the public sphere so the healthcare community can benefit from all that information.
Tell me what we could learn if that data were free.
Well, I mean, for example, when I was diagnosed as BRCA positive, what I was faced with was having to make significant life-altering decisions to have a double mastectomy and to have my ovaries removed, and 7 surgeries associated with all of that on the basis of the results of one test. And if you had the benefit of having all the data from everyone else's test from all the years of testing, then maybe they could have narrowed down through research that my particular BRCA2 gene was more likely to result in breast cancer but not ovarian cancer. So maybe my ovaries could have been saved if you had the benefit of taking a look at that data, but we don't.
So, Erin Matson, how important is access to all that data? How can researchers get to it?
Yeah, well, the interview with the Congresswoman shows the gravity of what we're up against. And unfortunately, breast cancer, the response has largely been reduced down to simply putting a pink lid on the groceries, or even having teenage boys wearing shirts at school that say, I heart boobies. And that's somehow taken as advancing the cause of breast cancer, fighting breast cancer forward. What we need to do is really 3 things. One is Myriad needs to release this data. This shows some of the worst aspects of having a for-profit driven health system, in that profits are really put above people and research and information, and that should be widely shared. Healthcare is a human right. This is something that we should be spreading widely. Another thing that this points out is breast cancer is very serious, and it's not just awareness. We need to have people getting screening, and one of the best things we could do to fight breast cancer today with the system as we have it would be to have these 23 states that haven't expanded Medicaid yet to make healthcare accessible to more people. And thirdly, I think, with breast cancer, unfortunately, we have a lot of these awareness campaigns that have no teeth. We need to see more looking into just corporate responsibility, and particularly around chemicals and things that we're being exposed to, which is directly linked to this crisis.
But I don't want to undercut, though, how much good these awareness campaigns and the pink in the grocery stores and whatnot do, though. Because as someone my age, a little bit younger, that was my first exposure to breast cancer. I didn't even know that breast cancer was an issue. And because of Susan G. Komen and organizations like that, I'm now aware. I know a lot more about this. They've helped to just raise so much awareness. And I agree with some of your points, but I just want to make that very clear. Yeah. That awareness campaign, those pink lids in the grocery store, are actually doing a lot to make sure that women are finding out about this early and more often.
Well, I think you got a good point. That you can reach people in different ways. I take your point very seriously.
Yeah, even if one of them is NFL players.
Oh, please, not that way.
In October.
Yeah. But her early act and her own, she's Mother Courage. She's got 3 children. She's a colleague, of course. But I never knew it when she was going through these painful operations. She never
lost a beat.
Yeah. But to have a young woman, we have all kinds of women talking about it, Susan B. Komen, that's wonderful, but have a very young woman who looks young, really telling young women what they need to know, so valuable and so rare.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think that there's something upsetting that breast cancer seems to touch so many people. I can think of several people in my life currently who are battling this disease, and it's a horrible thing, and I think it's becoming harder to avoid it in some ways. I think that she raises some very sort of interesting ethical questions that as a society we have to consider. This kind of public data is something that on one hand, especially as someone who has a father with a terrible disease, you can sort of imagine wanting to have all that information and at the same time thinking, my goodness, that presents all sorts of problems and questions that we have to consider as a community if we're ready to do that.
All right, lots to think about. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.